Hey, well, good morning again. We are back in the third week of Best Summer Ever, and we've had a great summer so far, I think, around here. So far, just to let you know, I think week one we talked about choosing to believe. I think that's the best. I think that's the beginning of the best summer you can ever have, is choosing to believe in Jesus. And so far, in the last 2 weeks, we have celebrated 14 people who have made that decision and gotten baptized to declare that. And I think that's awesome. So, I don't know, yeah. It's the best summer ever. And so we've just had this. I've had this idea of how do we make this the best summer ever. We start by believing in Jesus, making a choice to believe in Jesus and to lean into that, choosing to believe, allowing the Holy Spirit to change us from the inside out. And that's a work in progress. That is a process that takes a little bit of a time. It's not something that you believe in Jesus and then all of a sudden you have your life pulled together. And so we talked about that. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about what my best summer memory is. I don't know if you've ever thought of that, or if you have. I have so many of them that of great memories throughout my childhood and growing up, and what was the best summer ever. And last week I shared, last Sunday, a week ago today, I celebrated my 29th wedding anniversary. That's a pretty good summer, right? When you get married, but celebrated that. But I remember the first time that Cheryl and I, one of the first dates that we had, and I think I've shared this before, but one of the first dates that Cheryl and I had was we went to the lake. My older brother had a boat, and we went out to Forbes, and that was one of our first dates, which is really kind of awkward, you know. Hey, let's get in bathing suits and go. Yeah, that's fun. But anyway, we went to Forbes, and we decided to ski, and I thought I was I'm a pretty salty skier, but I got out and I skied first and went around the lake on two skis and kind of thought, well, all right, there you go, babe. And so I hop out. Cheryl hops out of the boat to take her turn, and she's like, yeah, just throw me one. And I'm like, oh, we're going to play that game. So she skied around on one ski, showed me up. It was like the best thing. So then that whole summer, I was determined that she was not going to out-ski me, and I don't think she can today. But anyway, I did finally get up on one. It took me all summer ever. But that was just a great memory. And so, when I thought of that and I was looking at Scripture, I thought there's actually a story in the Bible that talks about the best water ski ever. And I don't know if you've read that, but it's in Matthew. And Jesus, and so I want to give you some context before I read the story, and some of you may already know the story I'm talking about. But Jesus, I want to give you some context. He had just performed a miracle. Right before this story took place, Jesus had actually fed the 5,000. He took 5 loaves and 2 fish from a kid that brought his lunch, and then turned it into a miracle and fed over close to 10,000 people, because the 5,000 was just the men. And so he fed men, women, and children, and he fed all these people. And so after that whole day is done, and the disciples had gathered up all of the extra food that Jesus had created through this incredible miracle, it was late in the day, and so Jesus actually, you can read it in Matthew chapter 14, but Jesus instructs his disciples, hey, go get in the boat and go back across the lake, this lake that they were at. And so that's what the disciples did. The disciples gathered up all this food, put it in baskets, got back in the boat. And Jesus actually went to the mountains to pray. He would often go alone. He would send the disciples away, and he would get time alone. And there's a whole message there on its own that we need to be carving out that time for ourselves, just like Jesus did. But he went and prayed, and so by the time Jesus got done praying, he's like, I'll meet you guys over there. The disciples were headed out across the lake in their boat, and then a storm came up, and so they were freaking out. The storm came up, the waves were tall, the storm blows in, the disciples are fighting these heavy waves, and then all of a sudden, Jesus shows up walking on the water. Greatest water ski ever, right? Like, he just shows up walking on the water toward the boat, and the disciples see him, but they freak out. They, as we all would, right? Like, we would all, you see that, they thought it was a ghost. They were like, they're freaking out. They thought that they saw this guy walking across the water. And so here's where the story kind of gets good. As they're walking, they're crying. They think it's a a ghost. And so I'm going to read the story, but before I do that, I want to get into the main character of this story. The main character of the story is Peter. And so he's an apostle, he's a disciple. And Peter, just a little bit about Peter. He was, I think Peter just would have been a fun guy to hang around with. He was a fisherman. He probably had some colorful language. He wasn't polished. He was a central figure in the story of Jesus and the disciples. He was a little bit outspoken. He was a little bit impulsive. He was the same guy that cut off the soldier's ear when they came to get Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. So he was that kind of a guy. He just kind of was impulsive, and he did things, and he acted first, and then he thought about it later, And so I don't know if you know people like that in your life, but he was considered the apostle to the Jews, and Jesus later would refer to him, change his name to Cephas, which means the rock. He basically referred to Peter as the rock, and he was. And what's interesting, I think when we read this, when you read about the disciples. I don't know about you, but in my head, these are like grown men, right? Like I view them as grown, mature men, but in reality, they were not. They were, in reality, they were probably mid-teens and early 20s. So I want you to just think about some of the stuff that you guys did when you were mid-teens and early 20s, right? Like you just did crazy stuff, right? Your body, you just acted first, and then you thought about it later, and that's where these guys were. And Peter was actually probably a little bit older than some of the other disciples. We know that he was married. He was already married when he followed Jesus, when he started to follow Jesus. So he had a little bit of sense, but he's probably still in his early 20s. And I don't know if that helps you, but that just helps me, because I always think about these, apostles. When you read about apostles, you think, well, these were good Christian, church men that grew up in the. They were not. They were a ragtag group of fishermen and everyday common people, and they weren't polished, and they did stuff and said things that were wrong. But Jesus took these 12 guys and molded them and mentored them and discipled them into the men that he wanted to be. But Peter was, just probably in his early 20s. And when we pick up this story in Matthew chapter 14, verse 25, here's what happened when Jesus started walking on the water. It says about 3 o'clock in the morning, so 3 a.m., Jesus came toward them walking on the water. And I just want to read the story, and then we're going to kind of dissect it a little bit. It says, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once, and said, "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." Then Peter called out to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. And Jesus immediately reached out, grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When he climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Cool story, right? And have you ever had a moment of courage when you actually stepped out and did something courageous and then immediately panicked after the fact, or it didn't turn out like you thought it would? Like, it was a moment of courage that you did. And I remember one of my other summer memories I had was we went over to some people's house that we grew up in our church, and it was a kid by the name of Jeff Sadler. And Jeff, if you're watching, how you doing? But I remember this story. We went to Jeff Sadler's house, and we were at Jeff Sadler's house, and we rode bikes. He had a bike. My parents were talking to their parents and eating dinner, and we were just out goofing around. And so right next to Jeff's house was it was kind of like a rock quarry. He lived close to the rock quarry in Anna, and at the rock quarry, they had like a loading dock for semis, and it was like just built into the ground, but it was about this high off the ground, to where you can, and it was just a drop off. You know what I'm talking about. You've seen those things, right? So we thought, I just thought, this is going to be that is the best bike ramp I've ever seen. Somebody has to jump off that thing, right? And so, in the street, the way the street was, you could start way up at the top of the hill and get some super speed and come down there and hit that loading dock just perfect. And so Farron's like, "I'll go first." I'm like, "Okay." So he goes first, and he just starts tearing down that. And then as soon as he gets up to the edge, he's like, and hits the brakes and, gravel. He's like, I can do it, And so then I was like, well, I'll do it. So I took we're riding Jeff's bike, and I'm like, I don't know. So I'm like, and same thing. Like, as soon as I got to the edge, I'm like, oh, man, that's really high. I can't do it. And so finally, Jeff's like, I'm doing it. I'm like, all right, you go, man. He starts at the very top of the hill, and I mean, he is screaming down this hill toward this, and I mean, no hesitation whatsoever, like just boom, off the end of that thing. He caught so much air I have never in my life. It was the most epic bike jump I've ever seen in my life. And when he landed on his front tire. And he rode a wheelie on his front tire for about 50 yards. I don't know if it was that long, but he rode a wheelie for about 10 yards on that front wheel before he just went clean over the handlebars and just ate it and face planted in the gravel. It was the most epic thing I've ever witnessed in my life. It was one of my greatest summer memories. He was... It was so great. He was scarred from head to toe. And we were like, that was awesome. And it was like, oh, and then, of course, Farron and I like, we ain't doing that. That's dumb. It was just an awesome thing. But sometimes we have these moments, and I've had those moments where I think this is going to be a great idea, and I jump off without thinking about it, and it just ends in a face plant. Have you ever had that happen in your life? Like, it happens, and I absolutely love this story of Peter because it was probably his best summer ever. I mean, and I, just imagine this. Hey, guys, for the rest of his life, hey, guys, remember that time I jumped out of the boat and walked on water? For the rest of his life, Jeff Sadler was like, I run into him every now and then. I'm like, hey, do you remember that time when you jumped? I'm like, yeah, I remember that. The face plant in the gravel. It was awesome. But for the rest of his life, he had to be going, remember that time I jumped out of the boat and walked on water? And here's what, in verse 28, it says, then Peter called to him. And I love that he even had this thought. Right? Like, here's what Peter said. Then, verse 28, then Peter called to him, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water. Like, who thinks that? You're in the boat rowing. All the other disciples are freaked out because the waves, they're trying to keep the boat from capsizing. There's a violent storm, and Peter's first thought is like, hey, watch this. Hey, if this is really you, who even think? I love that he even had the thought. And I think that we get a picture of, the kind of guy that Peter was. He was probably like my brother-in-law, Tommy. We took him snow skiing once, never been on a set of skis in his life. He wore Carhartt coveralls at the ski. It's hilarious. But everybody else was getting a ski lesson, not Tommy. He was like off the Black Diamond, just like straight down. He was just like that. It's what Peter was. He's like, it's the middle of the night. It's 3 a.m. Everyone in the boat is freaked out. And Peter's like, I got an idea. I think this is going to be awesome. What? The Bible doesn't say this, but you can just hear him going, hey, guys, watch this. And so he does this. He said, and Jesus says, yes, come. And Peter's like, I'm out. Boom, over the side of the boat. He's like, verse 29, so Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. Wow, that is so cool. Best water ski ever. Best summer ever, right? I mean, it just made me think about what is God calling you to do? What is Jesus standing there going, hey, come on. Bring it on. Have you ever had an idea and go, man, Jesus, what do I think I ought to do with this? And he's just like, yes, come. Just jump over. Don't think about it. Just come. Follow me. Just come. Do what, and you're like, and I love that Peter didn't give any thought. Well, I might sink, or what happens? There might be sharks. I don't know what was in the water. He didn't think about any of that. He just bailed over the side, and he went walking toward Jesus on the water. He had this moment of panic. He made a commitment. He had the courage to step out. And I know that some of you are facing life-altering decisions right now in your life because they come up often in our lives. And there are things that maybe God is calling you to do, or maybe you have felt God pushing you in that direction, or maybe he's asking you to do something professionally. I don't know what that looks like. I've had them in my life. And you just have to bail over the side of the boat. And you have to listen for that voice of Jesus that says, yes, come. Hey, Jesus, should I do that? He's like, yes, just come. Follow me. Put your eyes on me. Keep it fixed on me and jump out of the boat. Have some courage and step out. Some of you did that a couple of weeks ago and you stood up in a room full of people. It takes courage to do that. My dad always had this affinity for flying, and if you knew my dad, he built a contraption in his garage over here at the parsonage called a powered parachute. I don't know if you knew that. Some of you know my dad because you saw him flying over the fairgrounds one year. But it was like this contraption that had if you don't know what it is, it's a parachute, and then you sit in it tandem with somebody else, and it had a 50-horse Rotax motor on back. It was like a big fan boat. And you laid the parachute on the ground and just gave it gas, and it popped up, and you took off and left the earth. It was the most amazing thing ever. So one time, he got it all put together in his garage. Literally, it came in a box. Like, who does that, right? Hey, let's build an airplane in the garage. Okay. So he put it together in his garage, and we would go, and I remember Farron and my brothers and we went to Greenville, to the airport in Greenville, and took a 2-hour ground course, so we were certified, to fly this dumb thing. Like, there was no, okay, watch out for clouds and don't run into stuff. That was pretty much the whole course right there. So we take it out to the airport one of the first times, and we get in. I'm like, I can fly that thing. And you just get in and you strap yourself in. And I remember when I took off, and I think maybe Cheryl was with me. She still hates me for this today. I don't know what she was thinking, like, get in there with me. But she rode in there, and I was like, and you give it gas, and she pops up, and you go, and up to that point, I was so confident. Like, I was like, how hard can it be? It's got a parachute, But then you get up like 100 feet in the air, and you're like, oh, no. I literally had that feeling. Like, I wanted to hurl off the side of the thing, but I was afraid I would puke on somebody. I got up. We were over the airport. I was flying. There were deer running around. Like, I was seeing everybody stuff in their backyard. I'm like, I'm going to plow this in the side of First Christian, over there. Like, I didn't know how I was going to get the stupid thing down. And I made several approaches, let me tell you. But it was that moment that I took off, and I literally was hundreds of feet in the air, and you just give it gas, you go higher, and I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do that. And so I'm like, and then you start coming down, and you're like, oh, that's too fast. So I was like, it had to look horrible. I nearly planted it into the side of Dad's Ford Ranger on the first approach. But I managed to get it on. But it was just that moment. And so that's what you see. There was just that moment of panic. I think when you trust God, you have that first, it's that moment of courage, right? You're like, I believe in Jesus. I know. But then when you stand up in a room full of people and you go, oh no, what have I done? What have I done? And you begin to look at the waves around you, and you begin to look at all the junk that's going on in your life, and you begin to see the ground below, and you're like, oh man, this is going to end poorly. And that's exactly what we saw with Peter. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. When I saw how high I was getting in that contraption that my dad had built in his garage, panic set in. I was not focused on the beautiful red, white, and blue parachute that was above me. I was focused on how far down the ground was and how hard it looked and how I was likely going to crash land. Life is never without the occasional storm. You maybe feel like you're walking through something right now, and it feels like it doesn't feel like the best summer ever for you. But we inevitably focus on the waves that are crashing around us, and sometimes we just need a reminder that Jesus is this beautiful red, white, and blue parachute. That we trusted enough to step out of the boat in the first place, and he's not going to just let us crash land. He said, "Save me," he shouted, was Peter's next words. So we have this moment of courage that's followed by moments of sheer panic. And then often in our life, we have moments of sheer failure. And I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of those moments in my walk with Christ. I continue to have them. There are things I'm not proud of. There are things that are just moments of failure where I've lost I've let my eyes drift away from Jesus and onto other things, and I begin to sink. And Peter failed. He often did. I mean, it's not the first story of his failure in the Bible. Read about him. He denied even knowing Jesus when they came to get him. But here's the thing I love about Peter, is that he had the courage to step out of the boat initially. I was chatting with Mark this week, and he was telling me about a vacation that he took, and I'm going to test some of y'all's history here, to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Does anybody, if you know the significance of, if you don't know this, I won't make you raise your hand. Some of you know, if you know the significance of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, raise your hand. If you don't, that's okay. You're probably like Cheryl. She has no idea what happened there. But on Kitty Hawk, North Carolina is where the Wright brothers first flew, right? And so Mark was telling me how he went to a museum, and here's the thing, like, they went to this museum he went to this museum that celebrates the Wright brothers' first flight. It happened in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And the first flight that they took lasted 12 seconds, and they went about 180 feet. That's it. 12 seconds and 180 feet. The Bible doesn't tell us how long Peter walked on the water. I'm guessing it probably wasn't very long. But he probably took a few steps, 8 or 10 or 12. I don't know how many steps that he took on the water before he began to focus on everything around him. But Peter had enough courage, and the Wright brothers had enough courage. And what's interesting in the museum that Mark was telling me about, it pointed out that only 70 years later from that moment at Kitty Hawk, we stepped on the surface of the moon. In 70 years. If Peter took a few steps in the first century, what should the expectation be for us in 2022? How far should we be walking? Peter had enough courage to step out and walk a few feet. What should be accomplishing by faith in Jesus? Perhaps we're not meant to just water ski or barefoot or just trust Jesus for a few steps. And I don't know what that looks like. He's calling us and saying, yes, come, go and make disciples. And here's what that looks like. Maybe it's you actually step out of the boat and walk next door and knock on your neighbor's door and introduce yourself. And for some of you, like, you just got hot thinking about that, like sweaty pits. Like, I could never do that. Maybe he's asking you to strike up a conversation. Maybe he's asking you to switch careers. Maybe he's asking you to invite somebody to church. Maybe he's telling you to believe in Jesus. Maybe today, like, the thought of believing in Jesus seems like I would never get out of this comfort zone in my life and trust that. How could I ever trust that? What if we learn to keep our eyes on him and to trust him to have enough courage to step out of our comfort zone? I believe if we were a church full of people that were willing to push I preached a message not too long ago titled Uncomfortable. I think the fact of the matter is a lot of us just are comfortable where we're at. And it's easy. It's easy to stay there. But here's the thing. Failure is often preceded by moments of incredible courage and trust, and it's often followed by immeasurable success. Let me read that again real quick. Failure is often preceded by moments of incredible courage and trust, and it's often followed by immeasurable success. Peter trusted Jesus completely and wholeheartedly enough to step out of a perfectly good floating boat. He got distracted and focused on the wrong things. And then he cried out in verse 30, he said, but when he saw the strong winds and waves, he was terrified and began to sink. And to many people, they would think, Peter failed. But did he? What is keeping you in your boat? What is your distraction? We all have one. What is your ocean that you are focused on that is going to cause you to sink? What are what is it? Is it you're afraid of what somebody might think? Are you afraid of what it might cost you? Here's where we land regardless of all of that. We can always cry out to Jesus, and that's exactly what Peter did. And here was Jesus' response. I loved it. Jesus immediately, he didn't wait for him to sink up to his throat. He didn't wait for him to, drown a little bit. He didn't wait for him to go under. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him and just reminded him, you have so little faith. Just trust me. Keep your eyes on me. Trust me. He immediately grabbed him, and when he climbed back in the boat, the wind stopped. Have you ever had something that you're worried about forever and ever, and then when you get past it, you're like, yeah, that was dumb. Why was I worried about that? Why was I stressed out over that? Why didn't I just trust him? Why didn't I trust him through that whole process? So once you get to know Peter, you begin to see in him all of what we wrestle with. We have incredible moments of courage. We have overwhelming defeat and failures. There's things done in the heat of the moment that we regret. Moments of great success. Moments we look back on and we wish we can change. For all that we see in Peter's life, here's what we know. He was in Jesus' inner circle. His name, Simon Peter, is mentioned 19 times in the Bible, and he's mentioned repeatedly in the 4 Gospels. He was founder of the church at Antioch, and evangelicals have always affirmed that Peter's role in spreading the gospel, and there's even a place called St. Peter's Cathedral that you can go visit today. This moment of courage that led to incredible failure, that led to incredible accomplishment. And I just want to challenge you this morning. If you want to have the best summer ever, I would encourage you to trust him in what he's asking you to do. Listen for that voice that's saying, Jesus, come. And lean into it. Keep your eyes fixed on him. And I promise you, you will have the best summer ever. Stand with me. I want to pray with you. Father, I thank you so much for this story. I love that we have these moments, Father, that we're faced with in our life where we have a choice to either lean into you and trust you, or we have an option to just stay in the boat. And we know, Father, I know from my own life that it's in those moments when I step out of the boat and out of my comfort zone that I feel most alive. And I feel most in tune with your will for my life. And I just pray, Father, in a congregation this size, I don't have any idea, and people that are watching online, I have no idea how you are speaking truth into people's lives today. Father, I know that it's easy to focus on the areas that we fall short and the areas that we fall that we don't think that we could possibly be used in a way by you. And Father, I just ask that you would just speak life, that this morning, Father, that those that are listening would hear your voice calling out from the waves saying, yes, come, trust me and lean into me. And Father, I just thank you so much for the courage of those that have had that courage to step out of the boat and to find the purpose that you have for us in our life. Father, thank you for loving us this morning. Thank you for this church and the faithfulness of the people here. Pray, Lord, that you would help us to find the courage to share the gospel, the courage to invite people to church this week, the courage to speak into someone's life, the courage to tell someone else why we believe in you and why what you have done in our personal life. Lord, help us to be disciples of you and followers of you more than anything else. Help us, keep us from temptation, keep us from those areas that Satan tries to trip us up on. Go with us this week, I pray. We give you all the praise and glory in your precious holy name, I pray. Amen. Hey, this morning, I just want to thank you guys for being here. Also, we got a bunch of ice cream left over from last week, so grab an ice cream bar on the way out. Don't worry about picking up chairs. Hang around, build some community, and have a great week. Happy 4th of July.